Hello and welcome to ABC News Powerhouse Politics. I'm ABC News Chief White House Correspondent Jonathan Karl.
Political Director Rick Klein.
And Rick, is that new music we got? What was that?
It is. We dialed it up, a special studio and special music just for today's show.
It kind of confused me. Well, we're going to be talking shortly with one of the top Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee. But Rick, right away, right at the very top of this podcast, we have our newly minted ABC News contributor, the former governor of New Jersey, Christie. Governor Christie, thank you for joining us.
John, Rick, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So let's get right. It's great to have you here. Let's get right to it. You said something to George Stephanopoulos the other day that caught my attention. He asked you point blank, should President Trump agree to be interviewed by the special counsel? You answered with a very blunt no. So can we dig into that a little
Sure.
bit? Because my sense is, and by way of background, the president has looked me in the eye twice and told me that he absolutely would talk to the special counsel. But his lawyers are basically saying exactly what you said. So what's going to happen here?
Well, I listen, ultimately what will happen is whatever the president wants to happen, because he's the client and he gets to make the choice. But I just don't think it's in his interest to do it, and that's the basis upon which I made the statement I made to George last week. I mean, it's not in the president's interest to sit down with a prosecutor and to give that prosecutor unfettered access to his thoughts and feelings about a whole variety of issues that have happened over a long period of time, where the president's recollection may be very good and in some instances not. And so I just don't think it's in his interest to do it, and that's why I gave the answer that I gave. Listen, I'm a former prosecutor. As you know, I was U.S. attorney for 7 years in New Jersey. I'd love to have the opportunity as a prosecutor to do that. That wasn't the question, though. The question George asked was, do I think the president should do it? And I think the answer is no.
Okay, then the follow-up question is, can he avoid it? I mean, if you go back, you know full well that obviously Bill Clinton testified in the Starr investigation. George W. Bush was questioned in the Scooter Libby investigation. Ronald Reagan was questioned in the Iran-Contra investigation. How does this president avoid what so many of his predecessors had to do?
Well, each one of those things can be distinguished from this circumstance, but let's do the Clinton one, since it's one of the more salient ones in regard to the scope of the investigation. Bill Clinton had given a deposition under oath in a civil matter for Paula Jones, which is really what led to their interest and their ability to be able to question him under oath in the special counsel area, because they had evidence that he had lied under oath, which is a crime. We have no evidence that this president has committed a crime at this point. And so the ability for Bob Mueller to bring him in, listen, if Bob Mueller wants to subpoena the president of the United States to a grand jury, he can. But that's a very, very aggressive step that I think the special counsel won't do unless he has real grounds to do it. And I don't know yet that we have evidence that he does. So the way to avoid it is that it's kind of a severe step. Now, if a grand jury subpoena is served on the president of the United States, then everyone's going to have to make some judgments about how they respond to that, and that puts us in a different realm. The question I was asked was essentially, should he voluntarily appear, and my position would be no.
Do you think they'd have to make some kind of arrangement, though? Was some kind of a questioning is inevitable in this? Is a political matter, if not as a legal matter?
Well, I think there may be some questioning that's inevitable here, but you got to see how it plays out. Bob Mueller is a serious guy, and I've been supportive of Mueller all the way throughout. I worked with him when I was U.S. attorney. He was director of the FBI. He's not going to question the president just for the sake of questioning the president. He's only going to ask the question the president of the United States if there is a real factual basis and need for him to do so to advance or complete his investigation. And I don't think we know that yet, and my guess is Bob Mueller doesn't know that yet, and that's why I don't think he's asked for the interview yet. So as a political matter, it only becomes necessary, I think, Rick, if Bob Mueller asks for it. Then you have a political issue. If Bob Mueller never asks, then I don't think Donald Trump, as president, has any obligation to volunteer to do it.
As you know, there was a big to-do over the last couple of days about the Nunes memo. When that came out, the president was quick to say that shows that Mueller's got nothing, basically. It clears Trump. Do you share that view? What you saw in the Nunes memo, does that clear Donald Trump's name?
No, nor does it clear anybody else in the administration. what it is another important piece of evidence that Mueller will have to consider as he's working his way through this. But a lot of what, at least if what's reported is accurate, Rick, a lot of what he's looking at now is all obstruction and other issues that happened post any alleged collusion that went on or didn't go on. I happen to have always believed there wasn't any, but it doesn't matter. At this point, the special counsel is looking at it, and my view on it is that the Nunes matter is only just another piece of evidence that the special counsel should be considering when deciding, who to charge in this matter, if anyone, or when to close the investigation.
And do we need to see the Democratic response to it? Do you think that needs to be declassified for part of that full consideration of the evidence?
I don't know that it really matters, but at this point, since the Republican one has been declassified, I wouldn't object to the Democratic one being declassified. But I don't know that it's, again, necessary, because I would presume that the special counsel could have access to it if he wanted to through either a cooperative agreement with the House or through a subpoena.
So switching gears entirely here. There's another Gabe Sherman article looking at some of the palace intrigue here at the White House, and one quote jumped out at me. He quotes somebody close to the president who speaks with him regularly, who says the president's not happy with his current team, and then here's the quote. He's saying he should have put Rudy at State and Christie at Justice. So let me ask you a little thought experiment. How would this first year of the Trump presidency have looked if Rudy Giuliani was the Secretary of State and Chris Christie was the Attorney General?
Well, it would be different. I guarantee you that.
Understatement, yeah.
And I think, listen, I have nothing but good things to say about Rex Tillerson, so I don't want this to be taken as any criticism of Rex, but Rudy is a different personality and brings different experience to it, and I think Rudy would have been a really good Secretary of State. So, and I certainly expressed that to the president-elect at the time when I was involved as chairman of the transition. As far as myself, I'm not going to get into talking about myself. I think, John, those people who watched me be the U.S. attorney in New Jersey for 7 years have a pretty good idea of how I would have conducted myself as Attorney General. And so it certainly would have been different. It would have been very different personalities. Rudy Giuliani and Chris Christie are very different personalities than Rex Tillerson and Jeff Sessions.
Would you take the job now if it were to come open?
I don't expect to be offered the job, Rick.
So I want to take you back 8 days. President gives that State of the Union address. I think pretty good reviews.
That's an eternity in this town.
It's a long time already. Exactly.
8 days.
So you were on our air and talking about the president, and I think he got pretty good reviews all around. What happened since then? What happened in the next week and a day?
Well, what happens is kind of what unfortunately often has happened in the last year, which is we get distracted from the substance by personality issues and what I would call peripheral issues. I consider the Nunes memo a peripheral issue, right, to the State of the Union. And so you get distracted by that. Now we're distracted by the allegations against Rob Porter, the staff secretary at the White House. And so instead of spending all this week, which in traditional White Houses would have been done, talking about the State of the Union and the high points of the speech, and there were a number of them, I thought, for the president, we're instead spending our time talking about Devin Nunes and his memo, and we're spending our time talking about, Rob Porter and his previous personal life, and
the president calling Democrats un-American for not applauding.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, listen, I know the president, for a long time. Sometimes people just take some of the things he says, I think, too literally and too seriously. This is in the end, he's president of the United States now, but he's just a guy from Queens. And being a guy from Jersey, I kind of understand guys from Queens. We're not brothers, but we're like cousins. And, they tend to be a little bit hyperbolic and all the rest of that in their speech and a little bit dramatic. And I think the president is clearly that. And so that part of it just kind of makes me laugh. I don't think the president thinks Democrats are really un-American, nor did he think not standing for his speech, I don't think he thought was treasonous. I think much more likely he just didn't like it. And having given 8 State of the State speeches, after a while you get used to the Democrats not standing for you, and it's okay.
Yeah, look, it wasn't treasonous. It wasn't un-American, but it was odd. I've been in a lot of those State of the Union addresses, and it was strange to watch. I was actually in the chamber. You saw the president come in, and they didn't applaud when he was announced, when he came in the room. They didn't applaud at the end of the speech. They ran to the exits. It's just even for partisan State of the Union responses, that was a little bit odd.
Agreed, by the way, and I said that on our broadcast afterwards. When people were being critical that the president hadn't unified the room, my response is twofold, and was that night. First is, there's nothing he could have said that would have made those people stand up. They're in wartime 2018 midterm footing, and that's what they're going to do. They're going to just be in a battle until November of 18 with this guy, and they're not going to give him an inch. And secondly, remember something. He wasn't talking to that room. He was talking to the rest of the country. And when you look at where his approval ratings have gone since then, when you look at the polls that have been done on what people thought of the speech, it was a good speech to the rest of the country, even if it didn't unify that room.
But let me ask you. You brought up the Rob Porter situation. I want to get your sense of how the White House handled this, both before it became public and now that it's been public. He was given a very important job in this White House. I mean, it's one of the most critical positions, staff secretary.
Yep.
We know that both of his ex-wives had talked to the FBI, and there had been a restraining order against him, several years ago. Was there a failure in vetting? And then once all this came public, including the photographs of his first wife, with black eyes, the White House is still kind of saying they're saying he's resigned, but he's going to stick around for a transition, and he's a great guy. And Kelly just yesterday was talking about how he was so honored to, how he's been honored to serve with him. I mean, what kind of a message are they sending on this?
Well, listen, John, I think first off, he's resigned.
But he's still here. He's still here. He hasn't left.
I understand, but he's resigned. And that is a move that brings disgrace to your name and your reputation, because he didn't resign voluntarily. It's clear that he was forced to resign given the circumstances. So let's get to the results first and foremost. Then secondly, I'd say to you, I mean, if you've got somebody there, if they did not know about these things before they employed him, then that's a failure of vetting.
Did his name come up during the transition at all? When you were
no,
transition
because
chairman?
we didn't vet White House staff at that stage. In the pre-election stage, our vetting was really focused on cabinet and sub-cabinet. Mm-hmm. And we felt that White House staff could wait till there was a chief of staff designated by the president, and then that person would really take the lead, and then we'd vet people that chief of staff sent to us to be considered. So we didn't get into it, and Porter was certainly not a name that came up for a cabinet position. But if they didn't know, it's a failure of vetting. And I think that the other thing people forget is that when you work in a place like that, whether it's a state house or a White House, people get personally very, very close. And you feel like you're kind of in a battle, in a war together. You're in a foxhole together. And they tend to always want to give those people who are in the foxhole the benefit of the doubt. And so I think that's part of what you probably saw with the reaction that General Kelly gave and some of the other folks. But in the end, they made him resign. And so the foxhole didn't last all that long. And I think probably appropriately so, given the pictures that we saw and all the rest. I mean, there's no way that any White House or any other employer can countenance domestic violence. And if, in fact, these women have gotten restraining orders and other things and have been willing to go on the record and say it, while that doesn't mean for certain that Mr. Porter is guilty, it certainly raises enough of a concern that if you're in a position like that, you need to go. And so I think, Jonathan, and this is part of the way where I think sometimes we're unfair to people in public life, not just the president, but lots of folks. If they get to the right result, we're critical of the process on how they got there. If they don't get to the right result, that and the process. I mean, if you get to the right result, ultimately, which I think was gotten to here with Rob Porter resigning, they do need to get some credit for that. And then if there needs to be an examination now in retrospect of the process, which there should be, then we should examine that, and they should let everybody know why he was in the job he was in to begin with.
Military parade on Pennsylvania Avenue. Thumbs up or thumbs down to this idea?
I don't care. I mean, I really, really don't care. I like.
Then why do it? I mean, it's going to cost taxpayer dollars. It's going to chew up the streets
The
in
president
Washington.
gets the chance to choose. Like, he didn't ask me. I mean, whether I thought it was a good idea or a bad idea. I don't really care about whether we have a military parade or we don't. And I think it's one of these things where we'll spend a couple of days now, grinding a lot on TV and radio and podcasts like this and others about it, when in the end, the American people aren't going to care one way or another, whether it happens or it doesn't happen. So I don't think we
But
should.
Governor, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it.
What, have a military parade?
Yeah.
I never had one when I was governor, and I was
The National Guard.
and I was, commander-in-chief of the New Jersey National Guard. We only had those. I reviewed the troops once a year, every year. In Seagirt at the National Guard headquarters, I would review the troops once a year, get a 19-gun salute. It was a lot of fun. But we didn't have parades, no, but we did have a review of the troops every year. So that was something that, at least my understanding was, it was required for me to do as commander-in-chief. So, if the president decides he wants to have a parade, that's his call. He's the president. But will it make me feel either much better about him or much worse? No, won't matter.
All right. Before you go, we got to ask you. There had been talk about you having a morning show on WFAN Sports Talk.
Yeah.
So what do we see some of this in your future? Are we going to see you doing some sports commentary?
I don't think so, John. I'd love to, but I don't think so.
Well, what about? I know you're a diehard Cowboys fan.
I am.
And
So is John Karl, by the way. The only two
Yeah,
people
I
I know
applaud
that are
that.
Cowboys and Mets fans are you and John Karl, by the way.
That's why we connect so deeply on such a
I mean, this is
personal level.
it's America's team, and we're both Americans.
That's
but
very right.
how did you take the Super Bowl? Did you, where you got a lot of obviously Eagles fans in Jersey,
Right.
And yet the Eagles are the frickin' Eagles.
Who
So,
I've angered, who I've angered for 8 years, as you know, John, by being a Cowboys fan, and they, and listen, I am happy for Eagle fans because previous to this, they were the angriest, most miserable fans in America, and so
now they're the happiest, most miserable fans.
Right
in America.
now they get to be happy. So I want them to enjoy their parade tomorrow. Now there's a parade I can get behind. If your team wins the Super Bowl, you should have a parade. And so have a parade down Broad Street tomorrow. I hope the weather's okay. I hope they have a great time. I hope there's millions of people there. I didn't root for either team on Sunday. I just watched the game, and it was a good game. I enjoyed the game. But I was not encumbered by any rooting interest. I'm not a Pats fan. I'm clearly not an Eagles fan. And so, and I had a woman come up to me in a hotel I was in over the weekend, and she said, Governor, come on, you got to root for the Eagles. And I said, all right, let me ask you a question. You're an Eagles fan, right? She said, yeah. I said, if the Cowboys were in the Super Bowl, would you root for the Cowboys? And she goes, no. And I go, well, then why do I have to root for the Eagles? So I'm happy for the Eagle fans that the cloak of failure that has hung on them since 1960 has been lifted. And that's great for them, and I'm thrilled for them. But, I had no rooting interest on Sunday. I just watched the game and enjoyed it.
Finally, an honest answer. That was well done.
How about that,
Yeah,
huh?
there you go.
That was good. All right, Governor Chris Christie, thank you for joining us on Powerhouse Politics. Welcome to ABC, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Happy to be part of the team, John. Thank you.
Great to have you here. When we come back, we'll talk to one of the top Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee.